Thank you very much, James. Welcome to BCIT Magazine. Let's kick it off here. We expected the Canucks to be in some sort of transition period. Did you expect them to be in double digits for the Austin Matthews sweepstakes?
I don't know if I expected them to be kind of right to where they've gone, but it's when Jim Benning took over, I think collectively you recognize that it was a flawed roster. And I think they had kind of hung on to a few veterans that had kind of passed the expiration date. And now they're kind of stuck in that middle earth where that greasy limbo where the young guys aren't quite ready for prime time and the veterans aren't what they used to be. And as one veteran player had explained it to me, 5 years ago when the Canucks were contending for a Stanley Cup, Chris Higgins was a fourth line player. And you love him in that spot. But when Chris Higgins is forced to play in the second line over the last 2 seasons, well, obviously in time in Utica as well, that tells you that the lack of depth is a big problem for the Vancouver Canucks and a big reason why they're right now competing for a very high draft pick. And hopefully they don't spoil it before it's all said and done.
We heard some of those veterans and it might still be here past their prime. What sort of environment in the dressing room do you think that's like for them?
I think it's hard. I think it's hard for the guys specifically like Daniel and Henrik Sedin, who are still really good players and guys that want to win and care. And I think you've heard those guys speak a little more truthfully and have been way more candid in their comments about wanting to see guys play better. And it's hard because I think in some respects, it's hard to see a colleague that you've trusted and gone to battle with so many times but just isn't there with the results anymore. And on the flip side, you've got new guys that are coming in and guys that are excited. And it's, let's face it, for a guy like Daniel Sedin or Henrik Sedin for that matter, 15 years ago, it was a much different style of league and it was a much different sort of mindset coming into the league 15 years ago than say what it is now in 2016. And generationally, kids are different, individuals are different. So, I think it's probably really hard that they're forced to bite their tongues a little bit in a lot of ways to see what's sort of unfolding, especially when the results aren't there. I mean, nobody shows up to work to fail. Nobody shows up to school to fail. And I think when you see those sorts of results, it's disheartening, but you still have to put your best foot forward every day. Unfortunately, not everybody's there to meet you that way.
So there is a lot of failing going on within the Canucks right now. What's your thought on the whole tanking process and does it work?
Well, I get you could. I don't know if there's a surefire way to say that it works. And look, I think if there's a certain point when your team just isn't there and you're going to struggle to have a few of those lean years, in one sense, it makes sense to go and try to get the best young players available to help your team reload for a long-term planning and a long-term vision. But does it always work? Look, the case in Chicago, yes. In the case of the Washington Capitals, yes. In the case of the Pittsburgh Penguins, yes. They struck the number. But there you go. And on the flip side, like how many times has Edmonton tried? They've had Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. They've had Nail Yakupov. They've had Taylor Hall. They've got Connor McDavid. And you know what? Things are going to probably trend upwards here in the next little bit. But they're looking at likely another top 3 pick, possibly a number 1 pick. But it's been 10 years. And that's been a very, very passionate, supportive market. But you know what? You go tell an owner that you're going to plan for 3 to 5 years of some losing times. You know what? Ask Francesco Aquilini how much he really wants to do that. This is a Vancouver city that has had 15 years of record attendance. They've been in a perennial playoff team for all of maybe 2-3 years in that time. And they've got almost a virtual empty lower bowl right now. That's a problem. And, in a gate-driven league that still a lot of revenues are driven by the gate despite the TV revenue, that still hits the owner's pockets. And, I don't know anybody that signs up for a business that wants to lose money.
How many Austin Matthews jerseys does it take to make up for 2 home playoff games?
A lot of Austin Matthews jerseys, but that changes the fortunes of your franchise, and that instills hope. And you listen to sports radio and you listen to the local market here. People are frustrated. They're fed up. People 2 years ago were all excited about Willie Desjardins and all excited about Jim Benning and Trevor Linden. Now everybody wants to run them out of town. Those guys all deserve a little more time. They're inheriting a tough situation and trying to navigate through a number of contracts that are tough to move, and you've got to navigate with that and trying to bring in and develop young players at the same time. Beyond that, it all changes with hope. And if you get that player, whether it's Liney, whether it's Matthews, or even Puljujarvi, those are guys that can have potentially an immediate impact next fall. Not to say that the team's all of a sudden a Stanley Cup contender, but at least shows the fan base that they're going in the right direction.
How much hope do the Whitecaps, the Lions, or even the Canadiens for that matter, have to pick up the slack a little bit now there's a little bit more room in the market?
I would say if there's a team that could really sort of win the city over if there was a time, the market is ripe for the Vancouver Whitecaps. It's a young, trendy sort of team. I don't know if it's necessarily speaking volumes to, the community outside of Vancouver, but I think a lot of people in the city have started to fall in love with these guys. They got to continue to trend upwards and win. My concern with the Whitecaps is that you've got field turf in there, and despite spending $500 million on renovating BC Place Stadium, it's a stadium that is prohibitive for MLS. And the best players in the league and some of the best players in the history of soccer that are starting to find their way through don't want to come here. The Canadiens are a lot of fun, and I think they'll benefit with the Jays being hot right now, but it's more of a sugar rush for the summer. But I think if there was ever a time for a team to really capture the hearts of this city with the Canucks going where they are, I think the Whitecaps have the opportunity, where the Lions are kind of stuck with a generation that the CFL has some issues to work out themselves.
Back to that turf issue, we just saw it here last weekend at BC Place. The LA Galaxy's in town. They're without their
no
their
Steven
star
Gerrard,
players, Frank
no
Lampard,
King. Yeah.
I think he's in New York City anyways. But
but Terry Henry didn't want to play. Didier Drogba, when the season kicked off, he wanted to continue training on grass. These are all players, like outside of David Beckham, the star players have been few and far between to want to come out here to play in Vancouver. And if you're a fan of MLS and if you're a fan of soccer and you want to see some of these guys because you're a season ticket holder, not just because you want to support the team, but you want to cheer on some of these legends that you watched for years in the Champions League, it's a bit of a buzzkill. It's a bit of a kick in the rear end when you've spent money on these tickets and then they say, oh, by the way, the good player's not playing. And you're like, oh! Like imagine going to a Lakers game and Kobe Bryant not playing, or going to watch the Warriors and no Steph Curry and no Klay Thompson.
Yeah, moving on here. Vancouver's not the only hockey team in limbo here. There's no Canadian teams in the playoffs this year for the NHL. What's that do for the Great White North here?
Well, it doesn't. It means a lot of people will tune out when it comes to watching playoffs this year. I think Rogers is probably very hopeful that the Jays are soaring right out of the gate to get all that hope. But, I think, as somebody said to me last week, it was a beautiful sunny day in Vancouver. It's 20 degrees. And, if the home team's not in the playoffs, it's pretty easy to forget about hockey when you've got a beautiful day. And I think that's a big problem from a broadcast standpoint. You've got a company that's spending, close to $500 million annually on television rights. And, when you've got 7 teams that aren't in the playoffs, that's a lot of eyeballs that aren't watching. So that's a big problem. And I think it just hurts for the growth of the league, and especially when you can see that hockey has, numbers have been dwindling in terms of enrollment, and that's not a good thing in terms of promoting the game. You might still get some exciting first rounds, but it's a big problem. And it's a problem we haven't seen at least in my lifetime until now.
Yeah.
And yours for that matter, right?
Yeah. James,
I think I got about 2 years on you, but just 2.
James, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, cheers.
Cheers.